do a presentation for you guys on the asset inventory, GIS mapping, capital improvement plan. I know you guys have the report as part of your packet. We'll kind of get there in a second, but I want to pull up the map. That's where I want to start. To show you guys, it'll be over here on the screen a little bit, so I don't think Zoom can see it, but I want to give you guys an idea of what we mapped and what went into, what's behind the asset inventory project. I'll take this off so you guys.
Sure.
So what we've done, and I'll zoom out just a little bit here because it's just big picture and I'll explain everything. So what we did is that to help, the town didn't have any mapping of water lines, sewer. I mean, we had paper copies of certain things, but not in any great, history. So what we did is the town, we put out a proposal, the town asked us to, it was an RFP. What we ended up doing is that we've mapped all the spring locations, which are all up in this area up here. We've mapped water lines, sewer lines, water service locations, PRVs, testing parameters, and let me pull up the details here to give you an idea. We've also put in, so we've got some current red lines. So staff went through and made changes to what we started with from the field. We've got our total coliform test points. We've got our lead and copper test points that are in the system. I've got it turned off right now, but we have tree inventories that have been done that we've put in there. We've got the stormwater inlets, manholes. We've got some of the storm drain. It used to be sewer, has been reconditioned to use for storm. Like I said, we've got PRVs, we've got hydrants, we've got system valves, and I'll zoom in and show you guys some of this. Water service connections, shut off, the curb stops to shut off water service. We've got the springs, sewer manholes, gravity manholes, water mains. We've got different zoning within the town limits. We've got the Delta County parcel, which is just the assessor stuff, just so that you can easily look in and see who owns what. We've also got the aerial image in the background. We also, as part of this, we did some street, and you saw in your packet, assess the streets. And so that map is also in here. So you can, with this GIS system, it's just a database that we maintain. When the town has changes or staff finds something that differs as they're inspecting a manhole or inspecting water lines, that can be added to the list and we can go update the database. So just for example here to show you what's going on, I'm going to shut off and just look at some water stuff right now just to give you an idea. So I'm going to shut off the sewer. I'm going to shut off the zoning because it doesn't matter right at the moment. Set up the manholes. And I'm just going to zoom in and focus right here, just for an example. So what this does, if I pull up this water line, it gives you, it pulls up this screen and tells you what went in there and how we shot it. So we know that's a 12-inch line in that section. These purple locations are water service locations. So those signify all the water service locations. These larger blue are the actual water valves for the street. And then you got your hydrants. So we mapped all that. So now if say there's a break on this line, well, it can be documented. We can put that in the database and say there was a water break on X date, so you go back in history and you can figure that out. What that's good for is that goes into your capital improvement plan. So starting from scratch, it's all new information. What I will say, I'm going to pull back on the manholes to give you an idea of something that can be done and what was done. So for example, we took pictures. So in this database, we took pictures of every manhole. So for example, on this manhole, if you take a picture, you see the top of the manhole. If you look at the other one, because we were doing a condition assessment of inside, you know, of what was in the manholes. So if it's brick, so if it was a brick manhole, we made note of it because those are going to need replaced sooner than a precast one, for example. Or if like all the steps are missing, that would be noted in these pictures. So that's what's behind all the different pictures. Now, obviously, you can't take a picture of the lines themselves because they're buried. So that's what's behind all this. Like I said, we mapped all the springs. You can pull up any parcel data. If I click on the parcel, it's going to tell me that who owns that property. So if in the address, that's, you know, that the county has with it. So it's all county information. So that's what's behind all of this mapping. What this does, it allows the town, they can pull it up on the, this is just an app through ArcGIS online. You can pull it up on your phone, you can look at it and see, oh yeah, that's an 8-inch line, or I have a problem, this doesn't look correct, we need to fix this in this situation. And we would go fix the database and make changes to it. We know that they're, you know, so I'll start jumping to the report a little bit. The big one here, I'm just gonna, because it's been a topic here lately. In the back is spreadsheets that we put together that goes through and list priority of, you know, various useful lives. So what we did is we took all the lengths of the various lines that we mapped. We put, let me just scroll to the top. So we have an installed date, we have location, we got some identifiers, whether or not they were priorities for the town, because it's, you know, old cast iron pipe, the 5-inch stuff that's causing you guys a bunch of problems in town. Or like, for example, this stuff in Lee's trailer park, that entire water line runs underneath all the trailer parks. So at some point, it would be good to get that out into public right away and not have, because if you have to fix it right now, it makes it more of a challenge. So those are just some of the things we identified. The materials, we went through with staff to identify materials and install dates, because some of this we don't have drawings that go all the way back. We don't have as-built. So some of this we have to put a date of a general, you know, like, well, it's the 70s, it's the 80s. But when you put that in, this is just in the part of the GIS that we have to put an identifier with it, so it's a potable water line. If we knew it was, say, an irrigation line, which there's no town irrigation lines in the sense that we picked up for the mapping, since they're private irrigation companies, so that's not included on this mapping. Could it be added? Yes. And that's the length. So then what we did from there is then we put it in this asset management spreadsheet that we have, or that we've developed. And so up here, as you could tell, this was done in 21 of last year, so I haven't made any changes yet to this year. So if I put in, I could change this to 2022, and it's going to spit out new numbers. Because what I've done, we've embedded in here, you know, different formulas as to, we have to put in an original cost estimate of how much it cost originally. So, for example, if you look up in the formula, so the original cost, if it was older than 1980, we used the $50 per linear foot just to establish a baseline cost. If it was between 80 and 2000, we used 75, and above 2000, we used 100. And so that's how we established an original cost. As we move across the spreadsheet, obviously this is just a calculation based off of that cost. The install date is when it was last known to be installed. The expected useful life, so we have different useful lives for HDPE, PVC, ductile iron pipe, and that's all in this spreadsheet. It's in, we have various, you know, lives, expected lives, just industry standards of when things typically start running out and when you have problems. So as we work across the spreadsheet, you know, then it calculates, you know, how much remaining useful life do you have. Well, I'm just going to use this example. So this is a 4-inch pipe. This was installed in 1980. We got 50 years. This was 2001, so we changed it to 2002 or 2021. Changes to 22, then your useful life drops to 8 years. So this one should be, and the reason this is because this has, there were some issues on this line, so that's why it's highlighted red. And that's why it's a priority. So we did, for that example, we did change the useful life category on it because there's been trouble with that one. What this does is then we go through a replacement cost. So we start calculating the remaining useful life, so it's just a percentage that's left. This again is a formula based on when it was installed to get a replacement cost. If it's old, then it gets a 3 times factor. If it's in the middle years, it gets a 2. If it's more recent, it gets a 1. Now, we can all argue these prices right now because they're way out of line, you know, just with inflation and everything. So these could go up. So that is one thing with this spreadsheet. It's going to be dynamic. We can change those costs at any time. So then we just calculate for that given line, we calculate a replacement value for that segment. We put a 2.5% inflation. That was kind of last year and kind of standard, you know, numbers, which are not good, right? You know, if I had to do this today, it's going to be much higher. Again, it can change. It's just we go in the spreadsheet, change number, it will pull it in. So then we got a future value and a future replacement cost. And this all resets once you change the year. And then if you go back and say, all right, well, I'm going to change this one. I'm going to put, you know, I go in and I change that and say we replace it this year. So it kick it down in the useful life. And you wouldn't have to worry, you know, for that for another, 50, 75 years. So what I did is some of these priorities, and you guys have seen them in your spreadsheets, you know, they're probably colored. So all the red stuff is would be stuff that was town priority, or at least on the water line side, it was all this cast iron pipe that is causing, or that was causing some issues. It's all the oddball size, 5 and 6 inch that's just causing major headaches. A lot of this is 3rd, 4th Avenue, you know, Orchard, Box Elder, 5th, North Fork, Main, 1st and 2nd. It's just when it was put in. Now there are some that were put in the 70s that are ductile, but that's got a longer useful life and hasn't been causing some problems. Now the thing with this priority list, this was purely to get a starting point. This was purely based off of the known issues within town. That might have changed in the last, I don't know, couple of months. It's going to evolve. And so the priorities that are currently listed in the report could be different if the, you know, as stuff comes up and project specific. I'm going to flip over to wastewater just for a second, just to kind of give the same thing. What this is, it's also same setup. The BCP, which is vitrified clay pipe, they no longer, I won't say they won't make it, but they don't make it. It's only specific situations. It's not, it's notorious for having, you know, leaks, joints breaking. There is a chunk of BCP in the collection system that was our first task or first priority list for the wastewater. Again, that can change based on board input or town input for specific projects. We also put in, I'll go back to the water. So we've put in get down on the bottom, so here's some other additional. Yellow was, you know, another priority. It just wasn't as high of a priority. So we threw that in there as well because it was getting close to a life, you know, useful life that you ought to start thinking. It might be just fine, but it's, you know, a place to start for priority since they're, you know, the lack of mapping, just paper copies and having documentation. I did get a lot of documentation from staff of, you know, what intersections look like with valving and all that to put into the map. Down here at the bottom, we also have tanks. So on the water side, we have both the tanks. We did not put in the 500,000 gallon tank that hasn't been used in about as long as SGM has been, you know, working from town since 13. We have the 2 million gallon tank and we have the 1 million gallon tank. These are, we've got just pure tank replacement costs. We've got interior and exterior coatings based on, you know, kind of costs that are, you know, pretty typical of coating costs. We have, you know, same with the concrete tank, similar numbers to keep the spreadsheets similar as far as what you're rebuilding and what you're coating. We also have treatment plants. We put the original installed cost of what it was in the year it was installed. Obviously, if you were to build landlord in today, there's no way you're going to get it done for $2 million. And I'm not saying you have to rebuild it. There's some equipment and stuff that takes that into account. But that's how all this is. Same with the wastewater. You know, we've got the mammals, which there's 168 mapped. Are we missing a few here and there? There's probably a few that are not there, that don't show up, that might be buried. That was one thing that staff was, you know, we had to dig some of them out. And so as they come across it, and if it's not in the mapping, all they have to do is take the GPS, mark it, or make a note of it, and we'll make a, you know, once there's enough, we'll come over and map it and then add it to the map itself. So we've got, you know, wastewater plant was installed in 2013 for $3 million. Typical lifespan on plants is, you know, 50 years. And so, you know, if you start adding that cost, replacement cost, future replacement cost, and this is if you went, you know, if you had to go to a mechanical plant, which the health department is, CPHE is not doing us any favors. They would rather see people, they're trying to get away from lagoons technology, even though it works, but the regulations are becoming so strict that they're kind of forcing you out. So that's a pretty good number, just knowing current bid pricing and projects that SGM has completed. That $14 million, if you had to replace the wastewater treatment plant, is a pretty accurate number, given inflation rate and everything. So that's how we've come up with all this. That's what's in your report. As far as the roads, we went through, and I'll highlight some other sections. So in the roads, we have a rating. It's called a Pazer rating. It's a 1 to 10. You know, it depends on how much crack is in the road, how much, you know, if the curb and gutter needs to be replaced. All that goes into that Pazer rating. That again is also in this mapping. So you could turn on just the road aspect of this, and streets, and just look at the streets by itself. So we also looked at some basic, you know, stuff here related to town facilities like town hall, the shop, the parks. Recommended some improvements, you know, just some things in there that, you know, to get a full comprehensive kind of capital improvement plan. Now, could that some of that stuff be delayed? Yes, it could. Some of that sticks. So that's kind of what I got for to kind of give you guys a background of the mapping and CIP. I'm sure there's questions, and I'll let you guys start asking questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we start questions from the board? People from the public, if you have questions, please write them down and we will get them. We're going to take a short break after the board asks questions so that we can collect all the public's questions and then deal with it. All right, so Yes,
Can I be heard sitting here?
yes.
Okay, I was wondering, reading through it, so on this map, is there a way, I'm in the old school where you have an overlay on the map, well, now we don't need that. But so is there a way to look at the streets and the pacer rating and look at the pipes under those streets and see if they are in
Yes.
the red?
Yes, we can, yes. So you could turn off, let me see if I can- I'll try to do this real quick.
But
It's possible, yes.
So you can get twice, you can get bang for your buck.
Yes, you can, all these on the side over here are just different things that you want the map to have on or off. And so you can have just the street stuff on and just the pacer ratings and just a lot of just see, or you can look at just the sewer lines and see. You can also, if I click, let's see, student water mains. So under here, if I pull up this table, it will say that I want to find this one. I highlight that and I go over here and I want to center on that selection. It tells me where it takes me right to that piece. So if I know, if somebody just, staff wants to look at it and say, well, I know that it's whichever location, and not have to go zoom in and find it specifically. I can just have the identifier and pull it up and find whichever piece that I want. So zoom in and filter. There's different filter functions about what you want. If you want to just select, cast iron pipe or all the ductile pipe and see how much there is in the system, you can do that. But yes, you can overlay multiple systems together. Now, what I will say is that these maps, just because there is, for security reasons, you don't want the general public having access to all of this information, right? This is staff information. So there are maps that the town has published already, because I know we've made them, that will show you just water. It will show you just sewer. It'll show you the trees. It'll show you the streets. But as far as access is concerned, you don't want to have the general public have access, because you don't want them changing all the parameters. But as far as viewing, yes, they could have viewing capabilities on it.
Well, it just seems like it'd be a great tool to start identifying the biggest priority in terms of if you're gonna have to dig up a street and see what's the life left in that water
Yes.
line underneath, so. Get the.
Well, yeah, and that's,
Yeah,
yes, yeah, for any capital improvement project, you want, if you're gonna dig it up, you wanna, assess everything at once. So if there's a project, say we're doing a water line down, well, we did one down Thursday. Sewer and stuff was looking, sewer and all that stuff is in the house, so that's not good. But you're gonna check with utilities, when that project happens, we check with gas, which, check to make sure that they didn't need to put something in as well. Because if it's tore up and it's open, put the stuff in now, and then patch it back. Given, infrastructure problems and funds available, yeah, there's probably gonna be times where you're just gonna be replacing, line replacements and have to come back and do streets, because typically a lot of that funding is not tied together. With streets and infrastructure, it's weird, but it's not. They only fund certain things. So yeah, you might have some patching that you just have to deal with for a couple of years until you can come back and do, the surface, improvements.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you gonna do much more that I would wanna sit here?
I don't think so, not unless
Thank you.
it's
All right.
specific, yeah.
Other questions from the board?
I have a question.
Yeah, Jeff.
Go ahead, Dave. After you.
You've never had the water rates that have each region. I was wondering what the process is for documenting those.
So
Who's responsible for that? Is there staff?
so for us to update the map, staff would have to at least, document it and tell us and say, hey, there's a water, we had a water break and repair, and here's a couple of pictures of the repair, that was at, you know, seconds and grams, for example. And we would go on the map, mark that location, and just put in, you know, one of these call outs, and I'll just pull one up just for the heck of it. You go in their database and you have this call up, and it would just, you put it in for a water break, and that way it would log it there. And if you started to see multiple of those in the same block or the same strip, you know, line segments, then you'd know that it's time for, you know, that helps guide the capital improvement plan. And it might be different than what, you know, when you set out to at the start of the year, it's saying, oh, we were gonna replace, you know, 2,000 feet over on, you know, 4th Street or whatever, but we've had multiple leaks over here on Second that we should, you know, switch, and we need to take care of that because that's more of a pressing issue.
I think what I'm concerned about is cost of staff time. Like, this sounds like ongoing, we need engineering services to do this, as opposed to training a staff person to do this input.
So we've definitely talked about that. And we wouldn't do any of these updating to the database or anything unless it was, you know, unless there's enough that it made sense. We wouldn't build a town every time. And so
it's not a per break basis, but it's like,
it would be,
it's updated in 6 months.
yeah, exactly, that there's enough stuff, and so, you know, and it just be, because if it literally, I mean, just to put in a water break, it'll take, you know, 5-10 minutes to do that on our end.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense for us to have, you know, just do that every break. It makes sense to, until there's, you know, yes, after 6 months, is there 15 items that need to put in the map? Great, it takes an hour, fine, that's what I'll do.
And then the second question is, when I noticed you had the county parcel map,
Yep.
there's a lot of change in ownership at that particular time. So is that the same kind of thing where you just update the map?
It is, so,
Owners?
yes, so if that's all embedded in the back, so if the county updates stuff, this is an online platform. So this ArcGIS online, that imagery, everything gets updated. And so I ignored a message when it started up on Cindy's computer to update the map, just because for this presentation, I wasn't gonna take the time, at least on Cindy's computer, to update that. But it will ask you if you want to refresh and update, you know, stuff, you know, new.
So when I read through your report, it wasn't clear to me that you had actually physically gone into the 2 million gallon, into the actual water treatment plant up there, and also into the, did you actually go inside of both of those
Yes.
facilities? Because where my brain's ready to explode is I read this report and I don't have all these red light bulbs, and then I listen to SGM, and all of a sudden my brain wants to explode.
So, yes.
I want to know what the difference is. It's a 2-year. I'm assuming you were in 2019.
We were in early part of, or I'll say late part of 20, when we did most of these inspections. So yes, it's been, in this sense, it's been 1.5 years since I was in the plant physically. So at the time, yeah, there was, did we document every last chemical pump in there? No, we grouped it into the water treatment plant, because it's all part of that. There's actually drawings and actually good, you know, as-built data of all that stuff as far as trying to inventory every last piece of equipment. It can be done, but it's cumbersome.
Yeah.
I'll say every time a chemical pump gets changed, which could be on a yearly basis, then you'd have to update that. And it can be done, it's just, we didn't do it for this specific piece.
Is that more JVS than what the people without guidance?
No,
Oh.
no.
The last one is, we have a number of private irrigation companies that run irrigation lines throughout the town.
Correct.
And I've been, you know, volunteer on 2 of those. It is such a hassle figuring out where the heck those lines are.
They don't know.
Yeah, we know, and we're always going in, they're trying to figure out.
So those can, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, those can easily be added to the map. But it would, you know, since it's not a town facility, town wasn't going to pay for that mapping at this point. And that's why the irrigation systems do not show up.
So the irrigation companies would have to contact your firm.
Or contact the town. I mean, they could contact the town, but it would be a separate contract through the sure. Yes.
True.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. First, just it's great GIS. I'm really stoked that we've gotten this far down the road. And Dave, you asked a lot of the questions that I had. I think one thing would be helpful if there's some kind of field form that the town could use. Have you created that for us yet, or?
We have plenty of examples. I could easily send a field form. I was kind of waiting for this to see what kind of comments would come out from board or from staff. But yes, I can put it on my list to get you guys a field inspection form. It could also be, for other entities, it could be like if somebody builds a house and you inspect the curb stop, and that inspection form goes into, I have another client that puts all their inspection forms, embedded in the database. So if they pull it up, it's like, well, here's the sewer tap, here's the water tap, all that stuff is just in the database. So yes, that can be done.
Yeah, I think having a standard field form would be helpful for us, just for the tracking purposes and to relay the data properly. I'm thinking about the future, and if we did not have a relationship with your firm, what value would this GIS be to us? Do we have this in hand, or how does that work?
Yeah, this is yours. I log in with town's username and password. And that can be changed at any time, and my access could go away. So yes, if there's some staff that can do it in the future as far as inputting all that stuff, yes, by all means, we let you guys do it. We don't have to maintain it. That's just what we've, done right now. And, that was the direction from staff to, at least when there were things come up, we would update them, but it would be on a, 6-month basis or whatever. It wouldn't be very often.
So this might be a question for you, Corinne. Are we maintaining an ArcGIS license then as a town?
Yes.
That's an annual maintenance cost that we have. Awesome. And last question, do we have like a metadata statements, or really I think what we would need is some kind of descriptive document on the database itself. What ideally we would have the capability to input data and maintain the database on our own. But I think some kind of white paper or something that kind of explains the foundation of this would help us have the capability of doing that in the future.
We can do that.
Okay, other questions from the board? No? I have some specific kind of questions, and I don't know if this presentation is a good time to ask them or not.
Oh, go ahead.
But I was wondering, like, for example, in section 2.1.2, you talk about chip sealing, and I was wondering how often would you recommend chip sealing?
Yeah, good question. I'm not a road guy. So I can't give you a good answer. Some of it is going to depend on the road and how, if it can be even chip sealed. It also depends on what size chips you're using, whether it's, larger. Some entities like the larger 3/4 gravel, which I don't know why. And then some like the smaller chips. So if it plows, then that stuff gets peeled off, at different rates. I would generally say, if I had to, I'm not a transportation guy and I can check. I'd probably say every 3 to 5 for chip seal, but I can confirm that.
Great, thank you. And then what is on tank linings? We've got on the Lamborn, the first lining lasted 22 years, the second lining lasted 18 years. What is an average life on a lining for a tank?
Like the coating systems?
Yeah.
Interior coatings are, I'll say 15 to 20. It's pretty typical. Exterior, I'll say it depends, how well the UV, because you need the UV inhibitor if it's an above ground tank. And so that's just a polyurethane coat, top coat. And I would say that that's probably more than 12 to 15. Because the sun just, even if it's got the UV resistance in it, it just gets beat on. And so 12 to 15 typically for exterior coatings.
So it seems like both of our linings in our Lamborn tank have,
They've helped, yes, they've done well. They've done really well. And even looking at the inspection videos that we looked at as part of this for the, well, not part of this, but recently with the 2 million tank project, is the lining system wasn't horrible. There's spots that it started to deteriorate. I mean, if you said it needed to go another couple of years, it would be okay. Does it need, there are a few spots where it's starting to flake and that you're gonna see corrosion. It's pretty typical with anything underwater that's been there, but it's not bad.
okay,
I've seen worse. I've definitely seen worse.
that isn't always hard.
Like I said before, you guys are not unlike any other, rural towns, small towns that have water and sewer infrastructure. It's difficult to maintain all of it. It's difficult for, just have enough staff to do all of it. It's not cheap to maintain any of it. And that's what's, a lot of times, since it's, water sewer lines are buried, people don't see them. And so it's just, it doesn't rise on their priority list.
So as far as the clay lines on the sewer system.
Yep.
How soon would you suggest we get those replaced?
Knowing your guys' situation, you don't have a lot of I&I problems.
So what's I&I?
I&I is inflow and infiltration. So that means that water can get in the pipe or it can get out of the pipe. And whether that's groundwater or groundwater coming in or wastewater going out, that you're losing stuff, that there's a root problem, or like I said, on the clay pipe, it just had, the joints are not very good. They end up, the gaskets and the joints start leaking over time. And if there's too much weight, the clay pipe starts to crumble. As you can imagine, clay is just not a great pipe material.
So you're talking about
Yep.
like if they're under the streets and the
Yeah, over time. I mean,
Okay.
it was used a lot in the 70s. It's just what was, technology at the time. I would say, knowing the town's current, infrastructure challenges, that I would focus more on the water stuff than I would the wastewater stuff, at least collection lines. There's not a known problem with those collection lines. The only reason that it's highlighted in red in that report is because it is the clay pipe, and that should be the first priority on the collection system.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, as far as the wastewater treatment upgrades, because of the state's increasing standards, do you know if they have like a grandfather policy where you're given a certain number of years to bring your system up to par once they pass the law? And is that different for larger community versus smaller?
So multiple questions there. So yes, there is you'll always get a compliance schedule. So if they put, I'll just use, because I know they're coming. So say they put total phosphorus in your permit for the wastewater plant. It has to show up in your permit first. So you'll get a new permit and says, total phosphorus, you have 5 years to comply with that regulation. So you'll get a schedule that says every year you got to check something off to meet that limit. So you will get 5 years to get to meet that new limit. If it's more like install an effluent flow meter, for example, which some clients have to do because they're old enough, they don't have an actual meter. That's usually, you get like 9 months to a year to install that. But if it's regulation and permit driven, it's 5 years.
And so with the new requirements that will require us to go to a tank system versus an enclosed system versus the lagoon.
So a mechanical plant versus
Right.
an aerated lagoon plant, okay?
Yes.
So that will likely, the state in 27 is drafting new wastewater regulations that address arsenic, which is a metal, and then total nitrogen and total phosphorus. And those parameters will come out in 27. So your first permit renewal after 2027 will contain a compliance schedule to meet those limits. I can't tell you what those limits are yet because it's going to be different for every facility because they all discharge to a different water body. And then you will get 5 years to comply.
So it sounds like we have some time to plan for that.
You would, I mean,
have-
that's the one thing that I will stress though, is that it's all about rates. As long as you have reserves, you know, that you're planning for some of this. And that's what it kind of shows in this capital on the spreadsheets. I mean, if you really wanted to, I'm not gonna scare you, but I won't leave it up long. So the annual requirement, if you were gonna address everything on the spreadsheet that we've got noted in there, is $6 million.
Yes.
So I'll get that off real quick.
Thank you.
And that's if you just start knocking off so much a year, but that's how much is in here. Is it, like I said, you're not any different from, you know, City of Golden Springs. They are in the same predicament. That they had, I mean, their water rates are, you know, just water is almost $160 a month. So it's, everybody's in the same predicament.
Well, I guess that's comforting in a
Well,
strange kind of way.
I just so that, yeah, I just want to put it in context.
So also, so moving to the Ellen Hansen Center, have you been inside since the upgrades were done to the kitchen?
Probably not. No.
Okay. So then-
Personally, no. And I know the structural guys and mechanical guys, I would say no as well, because they all came at the same time to look at the facility. And like I said, that was the fall of 20, when we did most of the inspections.
Okay, so that was not going to.
No, we could adjust, yes, and change, you know, if that's been done, then we just take that recommendation out.
Oh,
And that, what this is intended to do is be a starting point for the board, because you need capital improvement plans to go after funding. And so as long as you have a documentation and you have an idea, even if it's, like I said, the highlighted red section, even if you don't pick those, you still have others on your list that you can work with. And you have a plan that you say, well, yes, we have, it's in our capital improvement plan, we're gonna do this block, and it's gonna be water and sewer, and it's this many feet and all that.
all right, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so what, 6:20? How many questions do we have from the public? Two? Why don't we go ahead and get those asked? I mean, as long as we're, and then we'll take a break.
Sure.
Start the regular meeting.
Suzanne has some, she said.
Okay, all right.
There you go.
She's got a couple.
All right. All right, Thomas, I can't read your writing, so can you read your
I was
question?
just wondering if we could discuss the estimate, the tank replacement estimate that I provided.
Yeah, I figured that would
Okay.
come up, yes.
Good.
Is there a general question, Thomas?
I just thought it might be an appropriate time to discuss
So
the
the-
possibility of it.
Yeah, let me just, because it was 1 point, it was so, little context, Thomas, do they all know what you?
The board does.
So the glass line tank, the, you know, proposal that Thomas got, told Corinne this the other day. Yes, we've designed, a handful of the, with the manufacturer, the glass line tanks. That proposal doesn't seem out of the realm, of what you would see. The foundation part, yeah, that requires, I know they're taking a guess of what the foundation would be. Our structural group could do that after you did geotechnical investigations, because since that tank was built or the plant was built, that information is too old to rely on, so you have to do a new geotech investigation. And then you would, decide if you're tearing down the old tank or if you wanted to keep 2 tanks, and that's always an option. But yes, it's an appropriate estimate to this time. It's similar, I think. Well, if you're rebuilding a brand new tank, because these are just escalated costs, this 156 per gallon is an average cost that we had in our database from all, from various tanks in the last 5 years, and so that's where that came from. So the cost is less than what a welded steel tank. But the 1.6, just in that cost, I would say by the time you get a general contractor and marking it up, you're gonna get $2 million for sure. Is it a good way to go? Yes. I mean, we're bidding a project here in the next 2 weeks down in Macos that has all 3 options. It's got a concrete pre-stressed tank, a glass line tank, or a welded steel option. And so then what I could do is once I knew those numbers, I could update it based on cost per gallon here as well, and it'd give another data point.
It seems to me like if we're gonna pay like $1.5 million every like 10 to 18 years for a coating, it might make sense to get a tank that doesn't need to be recoated.
The interior wouldn't need to be because it's the glass fuse. The exterior would be, obviously, but that's the difference in the glass fuse. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question on that regard.
Sure.
Some of the stuff that I was looking at this online too, and one of the concerns was when there's a lot of solar gain, the steel is expanding at a different rate and the glass doesn't expand, and that you can get cracking because of that.
That is, yes, that's a possibility. I'll say they've come a long way, they've come further in the last, in the technology. Like I said, I know City of Rifle has one. Newcastle has one, town of Newcastle has one of these glass line tanks. And they haven't had any failures.
How long have theirs been installed?
Rifles is at least 2003.
Oh, okay.
And that's for their upper pressure zone, so it gets a lot of use.
Okay. All right, can we move on to other questions? All right. The sewer ditch has no responsibility for lines after they leave the main sewer ditch, but the shareholders do have responsibility. The town has some major shares through certain gates and thus have responsibility for that piping. Don't you think these pipes would be important?
I'm sure I followed.
Yeah.
It's for the mapping. You're saying that it's.
From the private water systems, is that what you're asking, Susan?
But that we own irrigation shares, and the town has major shares that come, they also have a collective from everybody's water, but they have major pipes that.
If there's,
their part.
if there's major irrigation pipes that is, I'll say, maybe not town completely owned, but enough that, it would be beneficial to include it on that. Yes.
So Towns Park, Lee's Park, and then I don't know where Apple Valleys are, but I do know where the Town Park beaches are.
Yeah, if it's ditches, we could, it's a little, ditches or pipes, it's a little easier to, if it's just main infrastructure, all the laterals to all the irrigation heads and stuff like that, I wouldn't recommend putting that stuff in. But the larger infrastructure, if it's, again, it can be a separate map, it could be, it'd be another detail, over here that you just select which one you want to show.
It can cause some major problems.
It could.
Not knowing
Yep,
where
it
the
could.
water's coming from.
It could. But this was definitely centered around water and sewer infrastructure for the most part on the map. But easily could be.
Okay, great. So Suzanne's other question is Second Street is concrete in areas, weeds and cracking around pavement joint. Can you seal concrete joints?
You can seal concrete joints to an extent. If there's too much heaving and movement, then the sealing's not going to do.
So the tar, they used to tar them all the time, but there's been no.
Yeah, and so if it's moved enough, that's just lack of a better term, it's just a Band-Aid. But if it's, significant movement, the tar just won't last. And so that would be, a road reconstruction project. Because what's happening is it's likely a subgrade problem that's causing that concrete.
Just micro cracks and weeds starting, like little weeds.
So if it's micro cracks, then you can probably get away with just sealing. If it's larger, start to break apart cracks, then it would need reconstruction.
Okay, and then the last question is, that doesn't look like it's for you, Brandon. It sounds like something else because it's about the redacted PRV valves on the Paonia site.
What about them?
She's saying PRV valves are on CD's PHE set. Why is this information redacted for Paonia? As is the pressure information, as is the pressure info. What is meant by access?
The only item that's redacted on the town page are the PRVs, and that was based on the fact that someone could cause a lot of havoc if they chose to access PRVs. And I'm not talking about someone that lives in a community or served by the water, but anyone that had ill will and ill intent and wanted to access a system and do harm to a large group of people could do it through the PRVs. And that's why they were suggested that they be a redacted item from the website.
That's pretty common.
The health department website online, I can find.
You can, but it's harder to navigate and for the general public. If you know what you're looking for, yeah, but if somebody just wants to, if the map shows up, it's for security. It's not, if somebody goes in and changes PRV set points in there, which they can, it could cause, issues within the system. Is it out there? Yeah. It's just it's good practice not to show all of that stuff. Just some viewable maps. But to know that, yeah, when you're talking to people, yeah, there's multiple PRVs in the system.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. Yes, Mr. Queen.
I was curious about our rate study that we had done by the rural, was that incorporated into this, the rural rate study?
The one that Colorado.
That was rural Colorado.
That wasn't incorporated. No, that's not
Okay.
in this.
So we have to kind of.
They can, yes, they can be worked, as one, as two documents together. But is it specifically in this capital improvement plan? No.
Yes, Cindy.
So just for information,
It wasn't used this direction, but his stuff was used to
Okay.
develop.
Okay,
the
gotcha.
rates.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, either way, they should go hand in hand. And SGM can help with rate studies as well. We do a fair amount. But yeah, you would take this improvement plan and say, well, I gotta do X million dollars a year. And how do you want to slice the pie? And
Ladies.
what does that mean for your improvement budget? And what funding are you gonna go after?
Great.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. One question, Brandon. There's a lot of recommendations in the document you provided for each category, but I'm wondering if we could take that a step further and really prioritize addressing issues based on need. Maybe some prioritization input might be needed from the town, but do you get?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yes, I would, in order to help kind of define a better list, I would need some input from town of what do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on just water infrastructure? Do you want to focus on just tanks? And I'm just picking big ones for, stuff like that. Or do you want to just focus on the road, a particular block in town and, everything that goes with it. So yeah, I would need some input from board and staff as to help flush that list out.
Cool.
And the only reason I say that is because we were starting from, kind of ground zero with, trying to develop the mapping and a plan to get started. And yes, I'm fully aware that this probably needs some refinement, but that comes from you guys.
It would be awesome to be able to work with you and your group on really having a prioritization list of what we need to address, top to bottom kind of.
Well, yeah, I'd say a lot of times when we do this, you know, our recommendations are, I wouldn't say completely, but they're a lot of times substantially different than what, you know, what the town sees as their priorities.
But if
And
we
sometimes,
can't,
and sometimes regulations will push priorities as well.
so if we sat with you and came with like public safety, transmission, regulations, we could come up with a list based on the recommendations per category.
Yes, we could.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so we have another question. Are there any structural reasons why the 1 million gallon tank would not be online? And then the second question, is it deteriorating to its, is it detrimental to its well-being and longevity to keep it offline?
So structure, first part was structural, reason
Structural,
why it's
yeah.
not online, no, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Because a new concrete floor was placed in it, and then the coating system was from Southwest Systems, sprayed the coating system in there. So structurally, it's fine.
Okay,
We know that there's groundwater issues underneath that, you know, that were causing issues underneath the tank. Back in 16, I think, I'm trying to remember when that 15, 16, when that tank project, the first tank project was, you know, rehab on that tank. But there was no structural issues with it. As far as the second part.
yeah, is it detrimental to keep it offline?
No, it's not, so with the roof and everything, since it's got a brand new metal roof and it's covered, I would say it'd be detrimental to the coating if it was just open and exposed to the sunlight, but since it's covered, it could sit empty. There's no problem with that. There's enough weight there, so the groundwater won't, you know, it won't force it out of the ground. So no, it's not detrimental to have it sit empty.
Okay, great.
I mean, it would, ideally you want it, I mean, if you can use it, yes. But it's not hurting you not to use it.
All right. All right, so I would suggest, it is now 6:34. Why don't we take a short
Okay.
break?
So the tank's got water in it,
Yeah,
okay, so did Travis fill it before in preparation, because he was gonna turn it back on? Okay, so there's water in it now. But I know it had been sitting prior to the end of the year, it had been sitting empty for a few years. And there's no detriment to that. With the water that's currently in there, yes, you'd have to, you'd likely have to, I don't know if you'd have to dump all the water, but you'd have to definitely treat the water, chlorine and pass, you know, there's tests that have to be done before you can release that to the public.
okay. Well, okay, so like I was saying, I think we should take a short break. Then we'll come back. If there are any other questions from the public at that time, we'll take them at that time. Yeah. And then,
One of our, I just would like to compliment you on the GIS maps. I actually am ORC for 6 little companies. And we now use these maps in even the smallest little companies. And we use it for everything now. So I think this is, what you have here is a baseline that we can really build from further quickly. Second thing is editing functions. You have to be really careful about who edits these maps, and I would hire, I edit a number of my own maps, but I would recommend possibly that SGM come over and possibly have a little training at some point with Steve Kirk, where you've got your.
Yeah, we did that, so prior, we did that with Travis. Steve did come over, we did a training with Travis of how, so that he could update and do red lines and stuff like that, was at least to get him trained on it. As far as staff and getting somebody, you know, somebody else editing capability, yes, we can come do that.
okay, yeah, Dr. Sariani, we're going to stop right now. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. Write your question down. We'll get it addressed when we come back. So I'm calling for a 10-minute break. We'll see you back at 6:46. Thank you.
Yes.
Somebody on the Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we amend the agenda to include a discussion about masks at the beginning.
Okay, do we have a second on that?
I'll second that.
All right, any further discussion from the board? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we will add that to, why don't we do that first? Because that will take care of that. Okay, are there any announcements?
Well, we haven't approved the agenda overall.
Oh,
Just that one thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we just, yes.
Are you done with Brandon?
Oh,
Maybe not, maybe not. Okay. So now we have the agenda as amended. Do we have a second on that?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agenda as amended.
Thank you. Do we have a second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, let's move on then. We're going to do announcements. Anybody have an announcement? All right, hearing none. I do want to remind the public that the microphone picks up conversations in the room and not just the voices of the trustees. So if you want to have a private conversation, please take it outside so that people who are watching online and via YouTube can actually hear what is being said. All right. Yes.
I'm not sure it's been told to the people that are actually joining in via Zoom, but have we explained how to put their hand up if they have a comment and that we are watching that? Yes. And so everybody on Zoom, put your hand up when it's time for public
Correct.
comment and you can get in too. And actually, it would be wonderful if one of you would do it so we can make sure it works.
Yeah, there is a raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you should be able to hit. And then a little hand will come up by your name and then we can go ahead and call on you during the public comment time. And I don't see anybody on phone tonight, but if you are on the phone, you would do *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute. Okay, so first item on the agenda then is the mask discussion. Dave?
I'll take my mask off so people can hear me. I've been watching the database COVID Act Now, which is a nonprofit database that colleagues of mine that manage crews use to decide when to deploy crews based on COVID. And I was just informed by email today because I watched Delta County and our risk went, there's severe, there's very high, and there's high. So the email I got today brought it down into the high category just for today. So the CDC guidelines also came up for today. So I'd like to move that we do not require masks for our public meetings.
Okay, do we have a second on that motion?
I second that motion.
All right, discussion by the board.
People can still opt to wear them, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
People can opt to wear them if they so desire.
We're not going to kick them out if they're wearing a mask.
Right, definitely not going to kick anybody out who's wearing a mask. Okay, anything from the public? All right, seeing none, we have a motion and a second to not require masks at the next meeting. All in favor? Opposed?
I'm at this meeting.
Oh, this
I'm at this meeting right
Well,
now.
then, all right, well, next meeting is covered. You know, if you want to do a retroactive to this meeting, we can do that too.
Well, that's what the intention of my motion was, that masks would no longer be required at meetings. That
Okay.
includes this one.
Okay, is the
So is there
board
a
in
second
agreement
on
with that?
Aye.
All right, then, take off your mask if you so desire.
It's midnight, take off.
All right, so we want to have a discussion. So we have a follow-up discussion as our next agenda item and possible actions regarding the plan for the water system. So I know we have priorities. I know we have things we have to get done. I know, Jeff, you have brought up the same issues several times. And would you like to outline those issues as far as what you see as the important things that we need to look at?
Thank you, Mary. I think as a board and honestly, probably with input from the town, we need to have prioritization for how we allocate our limited resources. And it gets to some of my questions, Brandon, earlier, of being able to apply those priorities to a report like this so that we have a clear list of action items coming out of this report. I think we're like so close to knowing how we need to address this And for me, it's public safety, water quality and delivery. And that's really, I mean, those for the whole town and how we run, those are really my primary priorities in that order.
And what do you see as issues that fall under the public safety?
Well, there are issues with water that fall under public safety,
Yeah.
like quality, the pressure reducing valves, things of that nature. But I also see, we had at our last meeting, a member of the public who was doing the flag work for the kids to cross the street. And there's a huge sheet of ice in front of the North Fork School and that the kids cross when they're going to school. And, things of that nature. Maybe we should think about, I don't know, there's a huge rabbit hole we can go down with public safety. Our police force, getting our police force, things of that nature that directly affect the safety of our town citizens. So I think with a work session, maybe we could come up with a more comprehensive list. But for now, I mean, that's the gist of what I'm getting at. It's, and I do think, when we go through these exercises, defining these terms is important. And I think that's maybe a step that we need to take is what is public safety to this body and to this town? And what does water delivery mean to us? But I would like to, we started down the master planning or a strategic planning process, and this is a part of that kind of exercise. And I would like to hear from the members of our citizenry, what they feel are priorities also, so that we can have, an informed set of guidelines. So when we're entering into decisions about what street to fix or what pipe to fix, we have some clear prioritization from the beginning of like, well, is this a public safety issue? No, well, maybe this next project is, and it just helps really clean the way on how we make our decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, other members of the board? Yes, Pam.
The one thing, I think we have, JDS has put some priorities in front of us with their progress report, but here to me is the elephant in the room, and we haven't talked about the budget. We have to look at this budget again because things that we approved probably, I'm just suggesting may no longer be the priority that they were. So I don't know if we do this in tandem. We look at the JDS recommendations, which right now are strictly water and drinking water. Their priorities. And look at how we're going to be able to pay for the near term that we need to get done. And then in the meantime, Corinne and Mayor Backen and I are looking at grant opportunities that may end up being a little bit more long-term, 2 years. But we need to, for me, the priority for me is the PRV system, getting up and running and replaced as needed. And the other priority for me are the water pump in the Landward Mesa treatment plant and those tanks in the back that are the extra
Skids.
the skids, but the 2 big tanks that floated and are potentially necessary for additional filtration. That
Just to anchor those down.
yes, and to fix the pipe. The pipe is broken. So those are things that SSG gave us as high priority. And I think we really need to focus on those in the near term. So that, again, I'm just throwing out my ideas that we need to probably focus on.
Yeah, Ms. Ferguson.
So those, the tie down for the tanks and the pipe repair are actually, they're being looked at those right now and what that's going, what the cost would be to do those repairs. I did receive confirmation this afternoon that we have an ORC with an A license who's coming over tomorrow to take a look at our plants and get an idea of whether or not that's something he feels he could take on. He is local-ish, and he operates Somerset and Oxbow for their water with, and like I said, he has an A license. So those are priorities, yes, for drinking. And the other part of what I wanted to say was exactly that the next step that I wanted to take was to take the priority list. Again, focus primarily on water. There'll be some shifts with streets and things as well down the line, but right now with the focus being on water and the Water Enterprise Fund, and work in those priorities into the budget that we have for this year and get an idea of what that looks like, and then bring that to the board. John Tedder is coming back on his own dime to take a second look and make sure that he has all the information and all the data that he feels necessary to give us a really good estimate on what it's going to cost to do the repairs and maintenance on the PRVs. So he'll be back also tomorrow, I believe. He said tomorrow.
Yes.
Just to follow up to that, do you have any idea what that PRV redo repair may cost?
No.
50,000, 100,000?
I do
No
not have
ballpark?
any ballpark because they're different. And they all, yep, each one's a different size. Each one needs a different thing. Some of them have mechanical bypass, some of them have manual bypass. Any with a manual need to be mechanical. There's a lot going on in some of them. It's real simple. He's like that. You just need to put a new knob on there, and that's. And some of them don't need anything. But then there are others that have a large need.
Yeah. So do you expect you'll be getting a written report from him?
Yes.
Identifying the good, the bad, and the serious?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we were figuring between $30,000 and $75,000 for 4 repairs. Isn't that correct?
That was the information that was provided by Mr. Wilbur. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Pete.
One thing that we haven't been very clear as a council, we have 2 months between now and a new board seated. I think it's really important as we as a board set, what do we want to do in the next 2 months? What has to happen in the next 2 weeks? What has to happen in the next 4 weeks? What has to happen in 6 weeks? So that staff is really clear about what our priorities, because we have not been good about setting expectations. We've been really good about adding all kinds of things and not saying this is number one. This is number two. So that's one thing that I think is really important. The second thing is, it really bugs me that 30 to 40% of our water is just leaked. And so I think you've already made strides to ask for bids on leak detection, but that is huge, because a lot of our, it should be 10 or 15% if I'm understanding some of the reports. And we need to be getting that under control. It's putting too much of a burden on our system. So that's it.
Yeah.
I just have a follow-up question to that. So that was one of the JDS recommendations. So do you have looking for a bid for someone, and are you looking at doing it remotely? Whatever that hydrophone system or something they do to find leaks?
Yes.
Okay. So, and that would be on the entire transmission system
Yes.
in town, as well as coming off both treatment plants?
Yes.
Okay. So that's another
Yes.
thing we have to look at for the near term to pay for.
Yes, that's the thing. A lot of these things are big ticket items that that were not the high priority. And so in the conversation with JDS, that's where we came up with the priority list, and SGM. It's really been collaborative. SGM and JDS have been communicating, I would say, pretty regularly over the last couple months.
I talk to them probably at least once a day.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Jeff.
I think some of this conversation goes back to the, especially with big ticket spending, like what are the real priorities? And like, we're losing a ton of water in the delivery. But if we have public safety issues that are higher, then under the priorities that I would propose, we wouldn't be spending money on that, on the leak detection until we hit those public safety expenditures first. And so, Dave, when you started talking about the next 2 months, that's where my brain goes, is like, we need to make these decisions on what we need to fix, because there's so many things that are broken. But if we had some things to help us make those decisions in the near term, then we could start acting, getting bids and fixing things. But we don't know like what's the most important thing to us right now. We're losing a ton of water, but we have water in the town today. And maybe there's a valve that's near someone's house that's more dangerous than finding the leaks. You know, so we're just at this place where there's so much information, but we don't have a structure to make the decisions in yet. And I feel like we need to get there pretty quickly.
So what would you suggest? I mean, that's the key then. What information is absolutely necessary for us to make, you know, a prioritization decision? Because we have a ton of information there.
Yeah.
How do we approach it?
Well, I think we need to decide what our priorities are. And if public safety is the number one, we go through the repairs that are needed and try to identify which ones are public safety repairs. And if they're like high priority public safety repairs, then we do those first. But again, this is my own point of view. Like, I feel like public safety should be our number one issue. And maybe even though we're losing a ton of water and delivery, that might not be the thing we need to fix right now. So it's not.
So can I ask?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Brandon.
Sure.
If you were to look at what you have collected from a public safety standpoint, what would you say are the top priorities that we need to address?
Well, for public safety, I'd say if it's just, this is a hard question to answer. So you have good water. The problem is, I wouldn't say that there's a public safety problem. It's just you're losing so much of your water that, you know, the treatment plants has to produce a lot more. And that in turn leads to mechanical failures down the line. Is it a public safety? No. And same with the wastewater. There's not a public safety concern as far as what the infrastructure priorities should be. The streets, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of throwing streets behind because I think there's other infrastructure problems. You were mentioning, if there's a valve, generally the valve isn't going to be the issue. The PRVs probably should be the first step.
Okay.
I don't know that I'd categorize that as public safety. It's just it helps the rest of the infrastructure, which may be a public safety, because if you have to shut off the water system and then start boiling, that becomes an issue, where you just have too many breaks that you have to shut stuff down. So the PRV would be kind of number one, and that's what JDS and we've talked about. Looking at John's list, there's 5 or 6 that some of them is just replace some gaskets and a few parts. I mean, there's one in here he just says good condition, may require new rubber gaskets. There's one in here that says valves are pretty new, good condition, no action necessary. So I'm sure he's going to take this report and he's going to put a number with these, and each one you can pick off and say, well, let's do that. This one's in good shape. We're not doing anything with that one. So he's going to give you an itemized list of what the costs are for each one. But that would be number one. After that, I would probably say I'd pick the worst areas where there's been the most line breaks, here in the recent past. And that's probably where I would, focus the next project. And whether there's a street project involved in that, or if it's just a patch, because that's what fund you can afford right now. I would go after infrastructure before I would go after streets in this case. That's how I would look at the public safety side, if that helps.
Do we have any issues with treatment that would fall under that category, or do you feel like we're good?
No, treatment wise, you're good. You guys have pretty clean water to start with. As I kind of mentioned last, the meeting I was at a few weeks ago, is that wasn't until recently that the health department, you know, classified the upper plant as goody. Before, it was just pull water out of the ground effectively, you know, take it from the springs, hit it with some chlorine and put it in the system, and that worked for years. It's just, there's a few tests that the health department, you know, keys in on, and then they will tell you that you have to put in an actual treatment plant. So
as far as the treatment plants, how imperative do you think that we get all the skids working?
you should at least have, I mean, at the upper plant, there's 3 skids, you should at least have 2 skids. The third one, if it, you know, if it needed to be pushed, because you can operate off of 1 skid. I mean, it's not ideal, but you can do it.
We are.
We are, I mean, I was gonna say you are. It's not ideal to not have another skid available, is what I should say. So you'd like to have 2 skids in operation. The third one, is it priority that it needs to be? No, but if it's not a huge expense to get all 3 of them to the point where they can operate, then I would say, yeah, that would be your second, you know, that would probably be the second priority after PRVs, is to make sure that you have 2 skids available for treatment. The lower plants, there's 2 skids down there. They are, kind of talking to Suzanne a little bit, they're active. They can be put back in active mode. There's a process to turn those back on. It's basically some chemical clean that has to happen, and I'm cutting some steps there, but you have to kind of prep the membranes for it to, you know, to be put back in service, and that requires cleaning and backwashing to get, you know, just to get it back ready. But as I said last time, if you can run off of the upper plant, there is no reason to run the lower plant unless you need it for an emergency standpoint. If you can just put water in that tank, which we have the, you know, the design for, there's no point spending more energy costs to, you know, to treat more water if you don't need to. And the system demand isn't there to run 2 plants. 2 tanks, yes. 2 plants, no.
And one comment on that is that my understanding is that we have water rights that are specific to one plant or the other, but not both.
Yeah,
correct.
So we do need to use those rights in some way, regardless of how we're using that lower plant.
Yeah, and you could just show diligence by running it for a month. You wouldn't have to run it, you know, or, you know, not diligence, but using your water right for a month, and you'd be good. And if you did that every year, fine. That's all you gotta do.
Yeah,
I wanted to follow up just kind of as a safety issue that Jeff has, is what I learned, we had to replace the pressure reducing valve in our own house. And of course, I was quizzing the plumber extensively about it. And so if we can get this PRV, the big PRVs working properly, that's going to help people, homeowners, because it puts pressure on the little solenoids in your ice maker, in your refrigerator, in your dishwasher. So getting those right will help people a lot. And so I'm so glad to hear about the PRVs and getting those done first. But I also feel like the leak detection is really important too, because if you know that you've got something that looks like it's about to go or a lot of water, get it in there before it goes and people lose water. I don't know, is there anything to be said for that to prevent a bigger problem?
I will say, I will say that leak detection is tough. Because it's all just based on, you know, sonar and listening. And so it's tough to pinpoint. You might have a small leak and it may not pick it up. It's going to pick up the larger ones or give you a pretty good indication where some larger ones are. Yes, I agree that should be, you know, higher on the list, you know, so maybe it's PRVs, treatment skids, and then leak detection, because that starts to get into your infrastructure, you know, and identifying which lines should be replaced first. And that leak detection will help, you know, steer you guys as to more problems, you know, versus less, and rather than somewhat taking a guess based on the age of a line or just known breaks, you know, in the past. So yes, that would help solidify that decision.
And I want to provide an anecdote. So when there was the big valve break on the Delta Avenue and Second, I watched a lot of it. And once they were able to empty the hole, pump it out enough, the water that poured from the east under the road was incredible. And the point of bringing this up is I wonder when we have water leaking, what is it undermining? And what future problem could we have that we don't even know about? So.
Correct. So a lot of times, you know, if you have a water leak, it just starts, you know, it'll follow the pipe, it'll erode the trench. That in turn starts to affect, you know, the structure above it, you know, all the backfill, the road, you know, then you start having soft spots and the road just, you know, the road will start to move. So yes, you're correct. It starts to point to, it can, it's not, you know, it's not 100%, but it can point to potential issues and just, it creates more issues if you have leaking.
Thank you.
Yes, and
So where does our tank lining fall in this?
Oh,
yeah.
well, and I kind of said it in the previous meeting, the tank, and I kind of said it a little bit earlier tonight. The lining on the tank, because the question was asked from the mayor about, you know, lining systems. In looking at the inspection videos and the stuff that we've done, the actual physical inspections, because we also put somebody in the tank to look at the structure. You could probably get by for another couple of years with not recoating that tank right. If there's other, you know, higher priorities, and suggesting that there probably is. I would probably put it on the same plane as leaking infrastructure and tanks. That's just where I would put it. PRVs is a pretty easy one to knock out. The treatment skids are a pretty easy one to knock out. And then I'd probably put the tank and the leak detection infrastructure stuff kind of on the same category.
Yeah.
Well, which made me think about, so the grants that we're looking at, it's possible that we may have an easy grant to fix the 2 million gallon tank. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
And if we'll have to balance what money is available now, because we don't have money available for replacing the 8-inch line coming from the 2 million gallon tank. Because one of the things I'm concerned about from public safety is the fire hydrants up in Apple Valley aren't getting adequate water because of an 8 going to a 6-inch line. If I read that right. So to me, that's another thing to think about. But grant money is kind of prescriptive as to what you can use it for. So we have this kind of a plate spinning thing going on.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned before, a lot of the, say, infrastructure, whether it's CDPHE or USDA, that pays for infrastructure. And I'll say water, sewer, piping. They don't pay for and they'll pay for that trench. They won't pay for the surface improvements and the road and stuff on top of it. It's completely separate funding. And that's why a lot of times you just end up patching the road for now. You have to get separate monies to come back and do curb, gutter, sidewalk, road, all that stuff. So that might be something as you would start explaining to, public, that there is going to be a lag between when you do infrastructure improvements and street improvements. And those priorities probably, diverge quite a bit.
So I have a question about, so in the water reserves, how much money do we actually have in reserves right now?
335,000.
We haven't earmarked that for anything at this point. It's just sitting there for us to use for whatever we want.
Well,
Correct?
it was currently per the budget, it is earmarked for matching funds for the tank line.
Okay. Okay. And so, and that is just one installment of ARPA, not both, correct?
That doesn't include the ARPA money.
Oh, that is without the ARPA money. So we have another $380,000 potentially when we get our second ARPA fund.
Because at the beginning of ARPA, you couldn't use it as matching funds.
Okay.
So is that still?
Oh, you can now?
Has that changed?
I don't know. I'm not sure. There's so many different funds out there. I mean, we track a lot of them too, because we get asked questions and
Yeah,
total funding, and I can't,
yeah, because, I think when we were talking about the ARPA funds to begin with, that was going to be the primary funding, and then we were going to use DOLA funds as to put that out. But at the same time, and Dana seemed to say this, Dana from DOLA, was that those ARPA funds could be used in conjunction with the DOLA funds to go ahead and pay.
they try, yeah, and I'd say generally in the funding world, they try to make it so that stuff can be combined.
Right.
If it's utility based in a sense, that they're all following the same kind of parameters of what reports you gotta turn in, what lists you gotta be, you gotta be on the, for CDPHE, which I know Corinne and Cindy, have done it, but you gotta be on the intended use plan in order to get funding, and you have to do the survey every year, tell them which projects that you want, kind of have an idea of projects that you wanna do, and dollar amounts.
Right.
At least to be on the list, and
Right.
that just is one step to get into funding.
And even in our discussion with CDPHE last week, most of those revolving funds are all loans.
Yep.
And they are not grants, and you have to meet disadvantaged community thing to even be considered to have loan forgiveness. So
Correct.
we would encumber the town with millions, potentially dollars of loans
Yes.
if we went the CDPHE route.
Yeah, and so, yes, you try to do as much as you can grant wise, but there is a point where unfortunately, they kind of force you into having a loan at some point too. Even if you do USDA, I'll just use that one as an example because we've done a fair amount of those too. It's a loan up front, and they won't give you grant money until the end. And you don't know how much grant money you get until after you do the loan process.
Mhm.
And so you might have, we had a project, City of Slide had a project that was back in 2010. It was an $11 million loan and a $1 million grant at the end, for a $12 million project.
Yeah, that's like the CDPHE that you take out your loan, you commit to paying that loan back, and then maybe they come back and
Yes,
give your loan.
correct.
So, yeah, and CDPHE grants, we also found out, are funded by oil and gas excise taxes, and so those aren't always available
Correct.
and are very, very competitive. So yeah. Okay. Anything else from the board about this? Yes,
So are we gonna make any kind of decisions at our meeting on the 10th and talk about what our criteria should be and what our priorities are? Because I think that's where our discussion started with. Right.
Yeah.
So I'd like to make a motion. that
Okay.
that be on the beginning of the agenda, not the
Okay.
end of the agenda. And that council members come with the criteria they want to use, like each of us, like Jeff has already outlined public safety and then safety of drinking water. So if we could, criteria is different than projects.
Right.
And so if we can think of 2 or 3 key criteria of each of us prior to that meeting, and then we can start vetting the projects against that criteria and do that at the beginning of the meeting instead of at 9:30 or 10 when we're all worn out and we're very ugly.
So let me try and succinctly put your motion into words instead of a paragraph.
I'd like to move that
Sure.
the council makes decisions on criteria at the beginning of the meeting on the 10th.
Okay.
Decision-making criteria.
Yeah, decision-making criteria to help us set priorities.
All right, how about we say, the motion would be that on March 10th, the board set criteria for,
Making decisions on priorities, and then follows that up with suggested priorities for the next 2 weeks.
your motion goes from here
I know.
to here.
I want to get things done.
Well, and I agree. Right? So,
So, the thing that's been lacking is making decisions. Put a little stake in the sand and say, Corinne, this is what we want to have happen in the next 2 weeks. instead of like just piling things on. So
Okay,
it can be
so-
helpful for staff.
Our motion has gone
Yes,
all wonky again.
I am.
but I think I have confidence in Candy being able to capture it properly.
But I'm supposed to repeat it for the board, and if I can't capture it properly, that's not gonna go very far.
Setting
So
criteria for
setting
priorities and setting
criteria
priorities.
for priorities
And
then-
setting priorities.
and then set the priorities
Mhm.
with considering a 2-week time. Criteria for priorities and then set priorities with an eye to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Further discussion from the board.
Do you need a second?
Oh, yeah. you need a
I'll
second.
second it.
Thank you.
Okay. Further discussion from the board. Yes.
I think it's a great idea, but I just want to clarify that the meeting on the 10th, as I understand it, JDS and SGM are both going to be present at that meeting for further reporting.
I was gonna ask, I can be.
Electronic, you don't have to be in person.
I can,
Yeah,
it's better for me to be in, it's just, I'd rather do it in person. For
Okay.
me,
You're invited.
it's just better, I think, than doing it across the street.
Okay.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to clarify that that should probably be, I don't know, well, let me know. I don't know. Should that be before the criteria or criteria first?
Well, I'm thinking criteria first, because we're
Okay.
making the decision. Then we have this expert input. And then we take that expert input and say, here's the priorities. Does that sound like a decent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, methodology.
Okay. All right. Anything else from the board? All right. Input from the public. Yes, Tom.
Is it specific to this motion or?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sure.
What prevents you from making the criteria right now? You have one, public safety.
What prevents us is further expert advice from JDS Hydro and having them here in the room to answer our questions. I think that's really important.
So then the next meeting, you're gonna have a
10.
presentation from Mr.
There.
Yeah, and JDS Hydro.
Correct.
But you want to put the the criteria before those meetings.
Yes.
So how are you gonna get, then you'll have to do the criteria after they present.
No.
Well, then you can do it now.
This is I want the board to,
Yeah, totally.
okay,
It seems to me that you want the board to think about this
right.
so that they have some time to actually come up with some good criteria
Criteria.
instead of just
Off the
doing a
fly.
knee-jerk
Yeah.
kind of reaction to that.
Hasn't the board members already thought of that?
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Patrick. Yes, Ms. Watson.
So I have a question about, are we just talking about the criteria for water infrastructure projects that JDS Hydro and SGM would talk about? So you're talking about tree board might have some important information that would have to come forward about maybe from the state forester, the tree report with bad trees and limbs that could fall on people. I mean, are you really talking about everything? Or are we just talking about JDS Hydro and SGM topics right now?
I think the board needs to make that decision. I can't answer for them.
Okay, well, I just wanted to put it out there so we understand what all is on the table here. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, yes, Mr. Markle?
I ask that you consider sending specific requests for information or decisions, if you come up with them in the interim, to the water committee. Because a lot of this applies, a lot of it we've already made recommendations on in the past. And we also did not specifically schedule a meeting until after this meeting so that we could have the opportunity to answer any questions or come up with any information that you guys might ask. And I do have other things I'd like to talk about the previous conversation, but I don't know what opportunity I might have to speak to that.
We'll get there. Let's get this taken care of first. Okay, so we have a motion. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand behind the
So
podium.
much.
I think
this is great. It almost feels like Paonia is just starting over, starting from ground zero here, and anything is possible, and that's a wonderful thing. I agree with the safety and structure and staffing. I think you're only as good as like really the quality of the people that you have on board, and it's a wonderful thing because we're starting from ground zero. So, so that's a really big consideration. I would love to see personally, like, how many people do we have? Oh, and budget's another concern in a huge way. How many people do we have on public works? We split up the public works to be utilities, and we only seem to have like, that's when Travis was like head, and then a number one guy under Travis, and then it was just one more person. And I think all those things are up for like reevaluation. So I think, you know, maybe pulling people off of public works to put 2 more people on that utilities. And I would love to know what public works does, like on a day-to-day basis. I would really love in those, you know, reports to just go like to print like every day really see what public works has really been doing, and for the whole staff. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Ask one quick question.
Make it fast, okay?
About the motion.
So to build on what I was saying about if it was just JDS and SGM, we have a study that was done by the State Forest Service that inventoried our trees. Has there ever been a formal presentation to the board about this? Because should we ask the state forester to come with her study too, so we understand the extent of the tree inventory and some of the extreme issues that we might be suffering from that are going to take some money. So I just wanted to put that out there. Hopefully we can invite the state forester to this meeting that's going to be represented by JDS Hydro and SGM, because I feel like we're always forgetting about the tree infrastructure, and tree infrastructure is not something you can replace really quickly. It can take 50 years to grow back. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so is the board ready to vote? Or do we have other comments we want to make prior to?
I was going to make it a face.
Yeah, I know. It's like on the verge of speaking.
No, we're voting on Dave's motion.
Right, correct. I was going to repeat it. So the criteria on the 310 meeting, early on the agenda, to have the criteria for priorities and to make, and then to make projects with make a criteria for priorities and to make priorities with an eye to projects in the next year.
The actual order. We'll talk about our priorities first. We will hear from Brandon and JDS, and then we will set what are the priorities.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion passes. Is there anything else as far as that goes that we want to do tonight? Doesn't look like it. So we have, Mr. Marker wanted to ask some questions or make some comments, and so I would like to give him the opportunity to do that.
How did you do that? I'll take that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I appreciate it. Actually, a question for Bear, right? Brandon, you mentioned that PRVs should be as comparably pretty easy item to knock out.
Looking at the list, yes, based on, you know, I deal with John pretty regularly, you know, I mean, crap, I play golf with him every year in a tournament. So I trust John, so does JDS. He's a well-known expert in PRVs. Looking at his list, it shouldn't be too cumbersome.
Right, I mean, like just like a ballpark estimate about how like months do you think?
Oh, I mean, if they, so they should have the valves, and let me just pull back up. They might have some valves in stock at their, you know, at their shop in Denver.
He said they do.
And so, yeah, they probably have a few of them because they keep a fair amount in stock. Some of them have a little bit different trim packages, if you will, for different, you know, pressures and all that. If they have them in stock, it's probably, you know, they could have them over here in a couple of weeks and then somebody can install them. They do not install them. They're just a sales rep.
But But to get the problem solved, basically, we should take maybe a matter of months.
Yeah, I mean, even if they had to order a valve, it's probably, I'll say 4 to 6 weeks to order one, if they have to get it. And then, yeah, after it's here, shouldn't take too long to install.
We'll say 3 months.
Yeah, probably, yeah, that's a safe,
So
that's a
we
safe
maybe expect
assumption.
that by, June?
Yes,
Okay.
safe assumption, yep.
Cool. So in June 2021, we were discussing PRV replacements at the water committee. That was one of our primary recommendations. That's 12 months ago. But as of then, or will be then. Other recommendations that we discussed on that date include an additional ORC, somebody that can do macro management, overviews, planning, big picture kind of stuff. Plant SOPs, which at that date I was told existed by Travis. And found out that they do not exist. Never did. And data collection was another item, which is I noticed absent from this conversation. The JDS has not been brought up at all. And I think those 4 items come up to, I don't know, maybe $100,000, $200,000 worth of advice that could have saved you guys, us, $200,000. So I don't know what to do at this point. It's too late, to act on this. But I do hope that you guys recognize the value of the team that you've put together and what they can do. So hopefully you can lean on them a little bit. And I also like to take this opportunity to let you know that the next water committee meeting will be my last one. Because Paige and I will not be, once I'm a trustee, will not both be able to do it. I think I've probably had my time and hasn't been effective clearly. So we'll see what the next team can bring. And also as an aside, Mayor, the state revolving fund from CDPHE is how we financed previous work on our plants. And I think we owe $3.5 million on that loan still, something like that. So I'm not sure if there are restrictions from the state in securing additional loans until that one is completed. That's all I have to say about it. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, yes, Ms. Watt.
I just had a question about what exactly is the pressure problem? I mean, we talk about PRVs a lot. When I'm in my house and I look at the pressure at my house, I think 87 pounds of pressure is a problem. But I don't know if that's what the engineers considered to be the problem. And so I guess I'm kind of not clear on what are the PRVs going to do. I know there's a lot of different pressures throughout the system, and I'm technically one of the lower ones. I know that when we have a water break and we're recharging the pressure, and my pressure is at 60, 65, there are complaints elsewhere on the system that their pressures are too low. So I'm wondering, is my pressure going to be lowered and fixed with my old iron pipes that come into my house, the galvanized pipes that I'm afraid of breaking and having to pay to replace? Is that going to be fixed from this, or are my expectations, I mean, I don't know if my expectations are what, are part of the bigger problem. And then also when you lower the pressures like this, those fire hydrants that are already too low, I don't know what part of the system they're on, if they're on my side, but who designs the pressure system in this town is what I'm wondering. Is that like something that's been designed, or is it just something that we throw some new valves on and hope everything gets fixed? I directed my comments to the mayor. I wasn't doing it talking about you guys. were so good.
That was very good. Brandon, do you have any answers?
Try to answer some of that. So the pressure, the PRVs is just pressure regulation. All they're trying to do is set the pressure because there's different pressure zones within town. And you, ideally, every town's different, every system's different, but you know, you don't want to be below 60 is really what you want to try to be at 60 to 80 is kind of where you want them to be. Every situation's different. Some are higher, some are a little bit lower. As far as the water model, JDS did the water model. And part of that is, I believe, you know, this is my opinion, that Paonia infrastructure was just put in and the system was never, there was never a model for the system to know what's going to happen. And so with having a water model now, you can predict, yeah, and it might tell you that that hydrant doesn't have enough fire flow, you know, from the system. And that's where you start making changes and put in, you know, make different pressure zones. That might require more PRVs. That might require changing the PRV settings in certain cases. And so without having a model of the system, there's no way to know that before. And so now that that stuff's in place, a lot of these decisions can start being made, and that will help the priority list. It's like, well, we don't have fire flow. That might be a public safety problem. You know, to go back to Jeff's comment. But you wouldn't know that a couple of years ago because there was no model.
Thank you, that answered my question.
All right, thank you. Yes, Christine.
Sorry, thanks so much, but while I have the expert here, so my question is about that 500,000 gallon plant that was deconstructed. And are we absolutely entirely sure that that was the good thing to do? Because did that have any effect on the pressure going into town? Like, why was that constructed in the first place? And when was that deconstructed? And are we sure that that was a good idea?
Do you have any help?
So I do not have any knowledge of the 500,000 gallon tank. So when SGM started in 2013 of doing, I don't remember, the first project was 3rd Street, water line. That 500,000 gallon tank was offline before we got involved. And so I don't know the history behind that. I know where it's located. I was told, from staff at the time that the tank was not, it wasn't worth repairing, wasn't worth putting back on the system. I don't, coming in, I didn't know the system at that point, and it's been off, and I don't know, I've never visited the site and know nothing about that tank. As far as would it have any effect on the pressure zones, where it's located, no, it would not have any pluses or minuses to the pressures in the system.
All right. Yes, Sarah.
I'll keep this brief. I've got a couple of things in terms of priorities. I agree with the PRVs. We beat that subject to death. My sense on the cost will be somewhere between 50 and 75,000. The PRVs we have in the town are high quality. They're clay valves, I think, and the valves don't necessarily have to be replaced. They can be rebuilt. As a matter of fact, I'm going to rebuild one tomorrow up on Mesa. So we just need to get the vendor of the valve there and get some ideas on cost. Otherwise, we're just shooting in the dark. But I'm estimating 50,000 somewhere. Second item is so PRVs on my list would be number one. Number two would be to fix the plant, and I think Filtercheck is working on that right now. And I think Josh Moore outlined a lot of things. They're pretty simple, most of them. Rebuilding a header on the skid is one, but that's so I think that's number two. The third thing I want to insert here is skate assistance. I'm an operator of 2 plants. And when you hire operators, they need to know what's going on in your plants all the time. I just rang up 2 of my plants on my iPad and I can see what's going on. One of the problems when Travis got in trouble was there was a SCADA problem also. His phone was off. So I'm a big fan of SCADA, and I talked to Brian Brownhills, Chris Lancey. You guys do controls?
No, we do not.
Yeah, Chris. So there's a few things up there to buff up your. Because if you're going to get a new RC, you got to give him the tools, and that means he needs to know what's going on at that plant 24/7. And the system that Filtercheck put in up there is pretty good, but the system that is in the clock tower plant is Alan Bradley stuff, which is a nightmare to work on. So I agree with your observation to take that plant online keep it on only as long as we have to keep the water bills going. So I think the SCADA system should be in there. On the subject of pressure, when the town was built, we didn't have a hydro recorder. We do now. And I think that we should put some remote SCADA pressure devices in the system as we have it now. And we looked at using some smart fire hydrants. Anyway, I'm a fan of gathering data, before you rebuild your engine, check your battery, right? The last thing I would put at the bottom of the list is leak detection. I've done leak patrol so many times that, and leaks are extremely hard to find. Now, the town allegedly has a 30% loss of what we call non-revenue water, but that's a rubber number. We don't know if that's true or not. And when all you guys, I was a physician in my previous life, when you go to the doctor, you get your blood test, right? And then he comes back and says, well, I think we got to repeat the blood test because I'm not sure about this. Your second $300. The question I have up there is, are our meters calibrated or mag meters coming out of the plant? Are they accurate?
I can't.
Don't know.
I can't.
So I think before we go making a lot of assumptions on that we have a 30% water loss, we better be darn sure that our metering is proper. The third thing is that I've taken enough water meters apart. Every meter I look at that's in a meter box is anywhere from 1% to 5% off. Now we have what do we have in town? 900 meters, 800. So if you do the math on 800 meters and assume that your loss on a meter is 2 or 3%, now you can easily be into 10 million gallons a month. So the fact of the matter is we don't know where the water's going, and our job is to make sure we have enough going in. And I think leak patrol should be pretty far down the line. Now I do agree that looking for leaks on the big pipes is important. So coming from the plant, probably even incoming on the PRVs, maybe we should have the meter there. So we can compare output with input and see if our leaks are in the big pipes. So we go after the big stuff first. The little stuff in town, we're just gonna have to live with, I think, probably forever. I do know that the town of Aurora's got a 28% net revenue loss water. I know that Grand Junction has somewhere between 19 and 26% non-revenue water. So my point is, let's don't worry about it. Now we got a lot of other things to fix. So that would be my list of things.
Thank you very much. Okay, last chance. All right. Anything else from the board? All right, then I adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Brandon, for coming, and your information has just been absolutely invaluable. And the work that you have done on the whole mapping thing is such an incredible asset. Oh.
Make sure you stop the live stream.
Good. All right.
Thanks. Nobody raised their hand. I want to see if we could hear.
They were responding and saying, so I think they could hear. And
Yeah, but I was hoping somebody would raise their hand so we could hear.
oh, right.
No.
No, don't delete it.
I said no.
Okay. I almost panicked. Like, no,
I mean, yeah.
Don't show my thoughts.
I'll call you. We'll just show it in your alley in Rabbit after I get your address. What's your address?
220.
That's my house. I am across there. I am the second house here.
All right, I do know right where you
There's
are.
that one with reduced zone, that lot. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It was far more than a lot.
But we'll do a drive-by. See how many loads we do. Thank you.
Much better.
You're welcome. The only thing I can say is, let's go home and talk to my wife. I wouldn't, it's been clear.